Thank you, Louise, for coming today and sharing your first-person testimony with us. It's always a pleasure to see you. We're great friends. To begin with, I'd like you to describe what you know about your family and how they were living in the Netherlands before the Nazis came in 1940.
So my family is Jewish, not overly religious, they were. And they lived a quiet life and they knew what was going on in Germany. But the Germans were our friends. We had not participated in the First World War, and we lived on and never expected anything to happen. My father was in business with his father. They had a textile firm, they manufactured clothing, and they had a chain of store where they sold the clothing. Mm-hmm. And they lived well. And then my parents got married just before the Nazis invaded Holland, and then my brother was born within that first year.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened, what changed when the Nazis came, when they invaded in 1940?
So my father had been mobilized and he was taken prisoner of war, but came back after a couple of weeks because Holland was annexed to Germany. Holland as a country, or the Netherlands as a country, didn't exist anymore. So it was tough for all Dutch people. Nobody likes their country to be taken away. Mm-hmm. And
your father was a reserve military officer.
Yes, he was, yes. And so life was difficult for all Dutch people, fairly from the beginning. And when the occupying Nazis, with the help of Dutch collaborators, got organized, they started with their rules and regulations against Jews and Jewish families.
And what were some of those regulations? Of course, at this point, you weren't born.
I wasn't born I was born in 1942, right. So do the math. So,
but what kind of regulations did your parents
first of
experience?
all, since my father had a Jewish business, Jewish people owned it. It was confiscated, taken away, and my father was sent packing, so no more income. He had to look for something that he could do to buy bread and milk for my mother and for my brother. So, and then other restrictions were that you couldn't use public transportation. Jews were not allowed to. You couldn't walk through a park, sit on a park bench, be educated by non-Jewish teachers. So you had to go to a Jewish school. Or be homeschooled if your city or town didn't have a Jewish school. You could only be treated by a Jewish doctor. Non-Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat Jews, but they didn't care and did it anyway. Those were real heroes. And life became smaller and smaller till 1942, when I was born.
And did your parents have to wear a Jewish star?
That's in Holland, was in 1942.
1942, that's
and
right.
It was only for people, in Holland, it was only for people above the age of 6. And that started around the time that I was born.
That started. Mm-hmm. And around that time, you had a family that you were very close to in Haarlem where you lived. Do you want to tell us about them?
Right. It was a very Orthodox Jewish family. They lived in not such a castle, a regular small house, but it was parents with 7 unmarried children. Some of them were engaged, but the children were all the ages of my parents, around 30. One set of grandparents, 2 unmarried aunts, and since they were so religious, they did a lot of cooking if there was food to be found, because food was rationed. And they befriended my family when we moved to that same street. And especially one of the daughters. Her name was Selma, and she was my mom's age, and she became a very good friend. She had been a teacher in a school, and of course was sent packing because she was Jewish. And she used to help my mom with her 2 little children, and they had a good time together. And Selma's dad was the president of the Jewish community of the town of Haarlem.
Right, and that was the traumatic experience that you had with that particular family in Haarlem. That gave you a kind of warning that things were really deteriorating in the Netherlands.
It was all it happened all around the time that I was 6 months old. The underground, or resistance, the heroes I call them because they risked their life to help people and fight against the occupying Nazis, they got really organized. And to make it hard for the Nazis to find where Jewish families were living, because we had a really good registration system, they got rid of our registration records because we were registered. Yeah, blew them up. We were registered with religion mentioned. So when they did it in the town of Haarlem, the next morning, you can imagine how angry the Nazis were. Mm-hmm. So they took the 10 most prominent Jewish men and marched them onto the town square and shot them in front of the population. Selma's dad, of course, was one of them as the president of the congregation, 2 rabbis, 2 cantors, and 5 other synagogue board members. That was a huge shock. Just before Selma's dad was shot and killed, we got orders to move to Amsterdam. The Nazis were ready to deport us all to the concentration camps or killing centers in Poland. And they tried what they wanted to concentrate the Jews. So the more people that lived in Amsterdam, our largest Jewish community, the easier it was for them to transport people from there. We hadn't done that when the order came. But then when Selma's dad was shot, about 2 days after he was shot, Selma was in our house and she heard so much noise on the street. And she looked out of our window and saw a large truck stop in front of her house. And her whole family, everybody who was visiting, was rounded up, pushed onto the truck, except for one brother who later escaped. She never saw her family again. So that same night, we moved to Amsterdam because my dad was afraid that the next truck would come for him.
Right. And so did your father continue his business in Amsterdam? What was he doing at the time? Because he lost his
business, and to make some money, he worked as a pants presser in a very small Jewish dry cleaning place in Haarlem, where we lived. And but what he had done, since he had a textile firm, as soon as he was pushed out and the firm was taken away from him, he asked some of the people that had worked with him to take out bolts and bolts of fabric, so that he had to trade with when he couldn't work anymore.
Right. But all this time, your father had this ingenious idea about getting you all into hiding, into a safe place.
Right.
Can you tell us what your father did, which I think is a brilliant idea,
we didn't have a hiding place when we went to Amsterdam, so we moved in with some of my father's military friends that were in the underground, in the resistance. And my father he had worked in Amsterdam, he had studied in Amsterdam, and he talked to some people that he could trust, what was a very hard thing, because that was one of the hardest things when we were occupied, that you didn't know you could trust. Right. Somebody could be a friend one day and be a collaborator the next day. Right. So he was lucky, he found an attic, you all saw the picture. It was an attic on top of an Amsterdam row house. Houses.
Like a brownstone.
Like brownstone, yes. Mm-hmm. 700 years old, they still look the same today. Amsterdam is an old city. And it was a storage facility for the different floors. Each floor was a different apartment. But it wasn't used. It had its own walk-up, but would make it easy because my father figured as soon as we go in there, he would be the only one to leave the attic to try to get food for us, medicine, or sometimes news, which was really important. But the place was also across the street from the main park in Amsterdam, the Vondelpark. He figured I go out. We had fake identity papers, and I had a fake name. I didn't know my name was Louisa. I thought my name was Maria. And all for safekeeping. That's the only thing my parents thought about during that whole time. How do we keep our children safe? So if he went out and we don't really exist anymore, this comes this strange man where is he coming from? People who talk. Having a park across from us made it a little safer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so your father put down a lot of rent.
Yeah, he paid. He found this place and he said, I want to use it. He didn't say for what. And he paid for about 10 years rent. He still had the money at that time, and he figured if I have to go every month and pay the rent, if I can get out or it's too dangerous, then what is the landlord going to do? He didn't even know the landlord was good or bad.
Right.
But I guess he was good. He left us there.
And so can you tell us about how you went in there? Who was in that apartment, that very small space with you?
There was nobody in there. It was a storage facility. It was just a
facility.
dusty storage facility.
Right.
It did have a small toilet with a small sink with cold running water. Did not have a bathroom with a shower or a tub, and did not have a kitchen. It had a table and chairs, and you saw me sitting on a couch. It was an old couch. There was a cupboard with some utensils. Maybe there were other things in there, but that's the only thing that I can remember or that I've seen in pictures. Mm-hmm. So they had to really figure out what to take. When you go into hiding, you cannot come with a large moving truck. It's like going in witness protection.
Right.
So they figured they would take a mattress for the adults. So it's my mom, my dad, and our friend Selma, who stayed with us. And because she had lost everybody already. And my brother got a mattress, and they took a crib for me, since I was only 6 months old. Mom took a camping stove, because there's no kitchen, so if there was anything to cook or water to boil, it was done on this camping stove. They took some pots and pans and some utensils and whatever they thought would be necessary, lots and lots of clothing, because they knew that we were growing. They couldn't go to a store, buy new clothes, or they needed to cut up old clothes for new clothes for the children, whatever. So they really thought about it, and the rest, if we ever needed anything, came from the heroes in the resistance that my father was able to get it through.
And your grandparents were with you in the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning, my grandparents were with us, my father's parents, and my father had made these strict rules. We had one little dormer window. Also, with some of the fabric that he had, he made little partitions. So he had a kind of a fake bedroom. He hung the fabric from the ceiling to the floor, like a bedroom for my parents, for my grandparents, for our friend Selma, and my brother and myself. The living area had that little window. The window was a no-no to look out. For us as children, the window was so high. It was a dormer window. But at one time, my father found my grandmother. She was standing on a chair, and she was looking out of the window and waving to people walking below. So he figured it's not going to work. Too many people. And he asked the resistance to find a place for them, and they found a place in the northern part of Holland, at a farm. And what was lucky for them, they could get out after dark, get some fresh air, and they survived. Yeah,
But
yeah.
that created some hard feelings later.
Terrible hard feelings, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, these are the sort of things you really don't think
Right.
about, but there are
Right.
still human dynamics involved.
Right,
when you're
and
in this
communications weren't like today. If you do something bad to somebody today, you can send them a quick email or text and tell them that you're really sorry. It didn't work.
No,
We
of
had no
course not.
telephone, and there were no communications, so
Right.
it made it hard.
Made it hard. And what do you remember about that time in hiding? What was your life like?
Right, and that's a really good question, because how do you keep two kids busy, right?
Little kids, right?
Right. My brother was 2 and I was 6 months. So I was crawling around and looking up and seeing my father and my mother and Selma and my brother sitting around that table. And it looked like they were having a good time. So as soon as I started walking, and I was an early walker, early talker, I talked all the time. And I asked if I could sit with them. So my father said to me, "You're too loud. You're always talking. You got to be really quiet." So I guess I made the right decision to be quiet in the beginning and sat with them. My father, thinking ahead as he always did, took a lot of scrap paper and crayons and color pencils into hiding. So what they were doing with my brother, they were doing colors, teaching him colors, playing all kinds of games with colors that you do with children. And they were teaching him numbers and letters. And then small words, simple arithmetic. It was a form of homeschooling. I loved every bit of it. If you do that all day long, it stays with you. It's repeated over and over again. So when we were liberated, I was almost 3 years old and I could read. It's not because I'm smart. You're all smarter than I am. But we had no outside distractions.
Right.
Also, if you teach somebody the word tree, you tell a kid when you walk outside, this is what a tree looks like.
Or there's a dog, or there's a cat.
Right. We didn't have that. My parents never talked about the outside world. They didn't want us to worry. They didn't want us to miss anything. They wanted us to just be happy kids in that small space. But my mom used to draw a tree. And she said, this is what a tree looks like. Then she would draw a bird and put the bird in the tree. And said, birds are in the tree. So we had an idea, but of course, when it was all over, we had no concept. But we had an idea, so you learn fast.
Right. And I think you were always, it took you a long time to realize, but you were ultimately, as you've said very often, very grateful to your parents for the way that they kept you not only safe, but unafraid for the most part, right?
For the most part, we were really unafraid. My brother was very careful with his little sister. So as soon as I started walking, I had to hold his hands all the time. He was told to take care of me. And my parents, with all the worries they had about their parents, about their siblings, about their friends, about everybody else, their focus was on their children. And I can't tell you how grateful I am about that. It's really a tribute to them that we're here. And that was that one picture that you saw.
Exactly, and that they kept things so normal.
Right.
What you would have assumed was a normal thing.
That's correct.
I mean, that's an incredible thing. And can you tell me just again, you've kind of hinted at it, but how did you survive? Because your father was going outside, was he not?
We were always hungry, and we were in the winter always very cold. But we as children always got something to eat, even if it was not enough for the adults. They saved something, so we had something. If you're not used to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you don't miss it. Sometimes, if we woke up, my mom used to boil water, and in the winter time, we could put our hands around the bowl, but it was wonderful because it was used to warm our hands, and we could drink it. Warm water is one of the best kept secrets. It settles your stomach, and for a while, you're not hungry. Now, if she wanted to keep us busy longer, she used to give us a soup spoon. And we used to ladle the water like soup and eat it like that. And it kept us busy. The resistance was absolutely amazing. My father didn't have ration coupons. We didn't exist anymore. We were in hiding. But they were amazing. Where they got the food from, I have no idea. But apparently, there was enough to keep us.
And your father was going out on certain
times. Sometimes he was warned that it was too dangerous, that there would be roundups in our area, and then he would stay in. And the 3 people that kind of took care of us from the resistance, one of them would come over to first see if we were still there. We could have been betrayed, and how they could help. Really unbelievable.
I remember you talking also about a certain physician.
Yeah, that was another thing. Children get childhood disease. There were no vaccinations, so we had measles and whooping cough, and my parents were very scared because we were running a high fever. And my father went out and asked the resistance if they could find a doctor. So we had a house call from a pediatrician who didn't do it just for us. He did it for a lot of other families. He was one of the heroes. And then till he was betrayed and sent to a concentration camp with his partner, where his partner was shot and he was severely beaten. But he came back and then was so beaten that he couldn't practice anymore. But he did that, and they all knew the risks they were taking, but they felt they had to do that for another human being.
Right. And I just want to kind of think about this in terms of how we see Dutch people in hiding, because the iconic figure is Anne Frank, and she was hiding not so far from you.
5 blocks.
5 blocks, right? With very different outcomes.
It was a similar way of hiding, in that way that she hid with her family.
Right.
She had help from the outside. And the same way, we hid as a family. We were not hidden by a family.
Right.
But I'm the lucky one.
Yes, indeed.
She was betrayed.
She was betrayed.
And didn't make it, yeah.
Right, but you were sort of living versus the secret annex where she's hidden, as everyone probably knows the story. You were sort of hiding in plain sight.
Right.
What did the neighbors think?
I don't know. So there is a gray area about some of the Dutch people, and the gray area is called, by some people, bystanders. They must have been typically bystanders. They didn't help us, but they didn't betray us. So in my point of view, they're good people. And it's a very hard thing to judge bystanders, because you have to live in that time. If I lived in that time with my children and I had a choice to help somebody and risk my children or just be silent, I don't know what I would have chosen.
Right.
So I have no idea who the neighbors were. They must have heard us. The Frank family, they had to be quiet because they were on top of his business. We had 3 floors below us. They must have heard us flush the toilet, run the water, children walk around, but they never said a word. And I think it was good that they didn't help us. Right. It's better that help comes from afar. If somebody, a collaborator, had rang that doorbell and said, what is that upstairs? They could say, well, it's a dusty storage attic. And if they were asked, are there people up there? They would have said, no, because they didn't know us. Had they known us, helped us, liked us, they would have had to lie about it. And when you lie, sometimes you give it away.
Right.
So.
But they also bombed. Amsterdam was bombed.
Bombed by the Allies and bombed by the Nazis. No, Amsterdam, the bombers flew actually over, but those bombs fell off. Oh. So accidentally, Amsterdam was bombed. Right. Yeah, and when the air raid alarms came for people to go into shelters, we couldn't go into shelters. We didn't exist. So we sat on the staircase. As soon as the alarm started, we tiptoed to the staircase, our own staircase. And then when the alarm went again, it was safe, we went back into the attic. And sometimes 20, 25 times. Yeah.
The staircase is a strong part of the house.
Yes, and it is absolutely true. And when you walk through Amsterdam much later and you saw houses that had a bomb fall on top of them, the staircase would still be standing there. But we would be sitting on the staircase. What would have happened to us?
Right.
But, we didn't think about it at that time.
Right. And towards the end of the time you were in hiding, your father was actually called up for a head count.
Right. So in 1944, in September, when the Allied army started liberating the Western Europe on our side, the Nazis had a good idea that they were going to lose the war, and they called up all the officers, reserve officers that they had let go, and my father didn't go. He was told by some of his friends, this is what's going to happen, and he said, if I have to go with my yellow star on my clothes, I don't think I'll ever come back. And that haunted us, of course, after liberation. That was not a good conduct, that my father didn't come for that head count. Right. All those officers were sent to Germany, back to a prisoner of war camp. Yeah.
And your father was arrested at one time. He had a brush with being caught.
Right.
Did he not, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. I guess somebody betrayed us. We had fake papers. My mom's, Selma's, and my brother and I were on my mom's papers. They kind of ignored that after they looked at it, but they took my dad, and he was able to escape.
Right. Yeah. The door was unlocked.
Yeah, the door of his prison was unlocked, and the front door was unlocked, and he just walked home in the night. But it was also in a time that they knew that they were going to lose the war towards the end, and they weren't that organized.
Right.
They were so organized in the beginning. At the end, they didn't know what to expect anymore. I'm talking, they were the Nazis. Yeah.
Right. In 1944, this was the famous birthday.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah.
Remember the photograph of Louise sitting in that chair on her second birthday?
When the Allied army landed in Normandy, my father, just after that, my father went out and came home with that news. My brother and I, had no idea what he was talking about. He said, the Allied army has landed, it might be over soon. We didn't know, because we didn't know anything about the outside world, but my father looked happier, I guess. And my brother picked up on that. So they wanted to make a celebration, and my birthday, second birthday was coming up, so they picked my birthday. And it took an elaborate planning, because in hiding it's not like today, you don't have the electronics to quickly order and invite people. My father did talk to one of his friends in the resistance and got some ingredients to bake a birthday cake on top of a camping stove. And his friend also gave him a little wicker chair that's in the museum right now, because Selma was making my first doll, a rag doll, and my mom cut up my favorite blouse that she had with little elephants on it and made a beautiful birthday dress. But my best present was my brother's toy. He was 2 years old when we went into hiding, and he had been allowed to take one toy. It was a little pool horse. So I was always allowed to look at it, but I was not allowed to play with it. It was his toy. So he wrapped it for me and gave it to me on my birthday. And when I wrapped it and he saw my happy face, he said, "It's just for today. I want it back tonight." Right.
Sibling rivalry.
I was happy. It was fun.
It was good.
Yes.
And so that was the day that you celebrated, and you have a picture.
Yeah.
That's unusual, right?
Well, because the person from the underground, from the resistance that gave my father the ingredients, also came over on that day, took a picture, said if she survives, because he took, of course, the camera back with him and the film. He couldn't leave anything just to make sure that everything would be safe. Because that could have opened a can of worms. So he said if she survives, she'll have the picture. No. And the picture is really a tribute to my parents. Because what you see is a happy 2-year-old that has no idea what's going on in the world. And if you all know a 2-year-old, they're happy in general. Right. So that's a tribute to my parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you remember liberation?
Yes, I do. So there was a lot of noise on the street on May 5th, 1945, and my father for the first time pulled up a chair and opened the window.
That was unusual.
Very unusual, so we were shocked. Then he looked out and he looked back and he said to my mom and the 2 children and to Selma, "I think it's over, I think we're free." So we had no concept what that meant. Yeah. Because we didn't know what we had been free. But they explained, but my father also, when he could, just before the winter started, had baked cookies with sugar, butter, and flour that he had gotten from people in the resistance. Yeah, really heavy on the butter. That was emergency food. He had sealed them in tins that he got from his friends. And sometimes my brother and I got a bite of a cookie, and if my parents are really hungry, if they hadn't eaten for a couple of days, they got a cookie. But that really sustained us. So we had 1 tin of cookies left. My father was hungry, very hungry when we were liberated. So he opened the last tin and he stuffed his face and put the tin on the table and said, "Everybody can take what they want." So my brother said, "It's nice to be free. It means eating cookies." Also, on that same day, they explained to my brother and I that what our real names were. So I went from Maria to Louisa. And that was fine. We never learned to question our parents. Whatever they said, that's the way it was. And that was actually the way it was till they died. I never, even when I was already a grandmother, never questioned my parents in their face or said
oatmeal.
No. Oh God. The oatmeal, my first meal, my first meal after liberation was oatmeal. My mother, so happy, something healthy for these kids. No more bites from cookies and all that. I hated the oatmeal, but I didn't dare say it. So just before my mom passed away, about 4 years ago, she was 99, I said to my mother, "I have to tell you something," because we ate oatmeal quite often when I grew up in the beginning. There wasn't much food to be had. I said, this disliked that oatmeal. She said, why didn't you tell me? I didn't dare do that. I just didn't know how to say.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, the Canadians, it was the Canadians who liberated Amsterdam.
Right.
Something that I think Dutch people always remember, that the
whole
Canadian
northern
liberators.
part of Holland was liberated by the Canadians.
Right.
About 8 months, like you said in the beginning,
Right.
8 months after the southern part was liberated.
Right.
And
Right at the end of the war.
right. So when people ask me what was your most traumatic part of this whole time, my personal part was actually liberation. My parents said, we've lived across the street from a park. We're going out, or you're going to play in the park. So you have to imagine, my father is walking down 4 flights of stairs, and my brother and I, holding on to each other for dear life, are following him. Then he opened the door, the front door, and there's all that light. We only had that little dormer window and no more walls. And then they take us to the park, put us on a grassy field, and of course I mimicked everything my brother did. He started crying, I started crying, and he said, if this is what it means to be free, I don't want to be free. I want to go back upstairs. My parents had no idea what had happened to any of their parents or siblings. There was no communication in the country, but they had kept their kids safe and they didn't want it.
Yeah.
But then after a few days after the oatmeal, and after a few days they took us out for a walk, and we met a lot of the Canadian soldiers that had liberated us. They tried to talk to Dutch families. It was a beautiful day, and you have to imagine all Dutch people, except for the collaborators, were so happy that it was over. So it's a beautiful spring day. Everybody's walking on the street. We didn't even have shoes. We had booties that Mom and Selma made for us. But these Canadians all wanted to talk to Dutch families that liberated us. We didn't know what they were saying. But they did something far better. They pulled Hershey bars out of their pockets. So we each got a Hershey bar. So after one bite, our stomachs were so little that we were full, and we could take the Hershey bar home, my mom said. Next morning, something strange happened. My brother, he wakes up and he jumps off his mattress and he screams through the apartment, when can we go outside again? He wanted more Hershey bars. Right.
Liberation means Hershey bars. It's
That's
a
right.
good thing.
Exactly.
Can you remember the immediate post-war? What happened with your family? Who survived? What did you do? And
My
what did you
father's
do?
parents survived.
The ones that had
right,
been
but
sent
we didn't know
away.
where they were. We didn't know where anybody was. My mom, in the beginning, rented as soon as she could, I think within 2 months, rented a place in the country so we could have fresh air, a place with a kitchen, very small place, but it had a kitchen. And they decided not to talk about the occupation, didn't talk about our years in hiding, didn't want to have anything to do with religion, because religion was danger, and they were afraid all their lives. That didn't sit well with me as I was growing up. So when I was about 15, I approached a rabbi and I said, I know that I'm Jewish, but I don't know anything about it. So I'm the only one of the family that kept the religion and the tradition. There's 3 more children after the war, and none of them kept the traditions at all. And my parents did bring us up with a lot of hatred, but not just my parents, the whole country. I heard not so long ago somebody say that there was a Quaker family that came from the United States to Holland to help the farmers plant crops. And she said, I couldn't believe it looked like the Dutch people hated the Germans more than the Germans hated the Jews. That's how strong it was. So I grew up in that time, and I spread hatred just like my parents did for a very long time.
Right.
I'm not very proud of that. When I grow up, you should start thinking for yourself.
Right. And sooner or later, you met this gentleman down here. He's Sydney.
Right.
Husband. Can we give him a hand for being here today?
Yeah, I went to
What happened?
I went to school in Holland. I became a physical therapist. And I met Sydney, who was a medical student in Holland. He's American. And we fell in love, we got married, and he graduated on the day our first daughter was born. And then in 1967, we came to the United States.
And now you have 4
I have
children?
3 children and 6 grandchildren.
Yeah, that's good, huh?
Right. Right. I didn't do it.
You had a hand in it. You
Right.
had a hand in it. And I think I'm going to ask one last question, then we'll open the audience to some questions, if that's all right with you. But most of these central events in hiding, you were very young.
Right.
How do you know what happened? I think that's what a lot of people are, because a lot of our memories when we're very young are very fuzzy or hazy. How do you remember what happened?
Well, there are a couple of things. We had no outside, so life was very small inside that attic, so there's no distractions.
Right.
I have a really good memory. I have photographic memory, but it's not always a blessing, because you don't always want to see all these films. But I saw things and I remembered things, and then you're never sure if that's a dream or did it really happen.
Right, when you're little, right?
I couldn't talk about it at home because my parents didn't want to talk about it. Lucky for me, I had my friend Selma, my mom's friend. I spent a lot of time with her and I saved my questions. I said, what happened? Why did my hand hurt at a certain time? She said, because your brother just squeezed your hand so hard because you both were so afraid. So things were put in place for me, and that's why I can talk about it. And then in the last 6 years of my father's life, I talked to him because he wanted to talk. He said, I'm sorry I didn't talk before, but if we stop talking and we don't talk, then people are not going to believe that really happened. So I spent so much time with him because I visited Holland and spent 3 weeks with him, 24 hours, and we were able to talk. My mom, till she passed away, never talked.
Right.
She talked in strange ways, what happened to so-and-so? Well, that person didn't come back. She didn't say the other person was murdered or sent to a concentration camp. No, didn't come back. So there was always a strange way of talking.
Right.
But yeah, that's how I was able to piece things together. And because of Selma, who was always my friend.
Because of your father.
Right.
Okay. So we have, I think, a few minutes, and I want to see where Sonia is.
Right here.
Here's Sonia, and she's giving. Sonia, how much time do we have? Can we 12 minutes? Okay, so we're going to do that. So we have some questions here. My colleagues are coming around with microphones. And let me put on my glasses because last time I didn't, I called a sir or ma'am. Yes. And if you'll just wait for go ahead, for the microphone. Go ahead. There we go.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us here. I had the privilege of going to Haarlem about 5 years ago and going to the Corrie ten Boom house. And I'm just curious at what point in your life you heard about Corrie, or have you been to Haarlem or knew anybody that knew her or anybody that was in her hiding place as you grew up, or how any part of your story aligned with that?
Okay, so Corrie ten Boom, I don't know why she is singled out and glorified so much, especially here in America. I know she wrote books, or books were written about her story. She was one of a whole group of what I call heroes, people in the resistance. In Haarlem, where we lived and where we had our Jewish community, never heard of Corrie ten Boom. She worked a different angle with her church and her father. So I had never heard of that till people said, "You from Holland, don't you know Corrie ten Boom?" But I know that she was one of the heroes that risked their lives to help us. And we wouldn't be sitting here, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it hadn't been for people like that.
Okay. Other questions? Right up here. Just wait for the microphone. There we go.
What happened to Selma after the war?
Okay.
Yeah.
What happened to Selma after the war? I'm supposed to repeat the question.
Okay, sorry.
There we go.
Okay.
Please.
So Selma really wanted to leave Holland. She didn't trust anybody. In the beginning, she spent, when the trains were back riding, but took a long time before they fixed all the railroad tracks that had been bombed. She used to spend her time at a railroad station watching every train coming in, hoping that one of her relatives would come back. But they didn't, just her one brother. And her brother left Holland and moved to France because they didn't trust anybody. They were afraid of the collaborators because they feel that they were betrayed by collaborators. And Selma wanted to move to Israel. She was engaged before the war. Her husband was hidden in the southern part of Holland, and they met each other after the northern part was liberated. They got married, and her husband didn't want to go to Israel. So when he passed away, they had a very good marriage, and he passed away when she was 80, and she moved to Israel. And she had 13 glorious years there, and we had a lot of contact, and especially in the last 10 years that she lived, we used to go every other year to see her.
Did they have children?
Did they have children?
Selma and her husband decided not to have children, and they adopted 2 war orphans.
Other questions? Right here, this gentleman with the hat. Just wait for the mic. Hold on a second. My brilliant colleagues are bringing you the mic. There.
With a lot of the things that goes on in our society today, the hatred, a lot of the spewing, do you see parallels? And I know you were very young then, but in our society and what we deal with here, do you see parallels as to what was going on then? Because actually, in my view, that was not that long ago.
Right. Are there parallels in today's society? The gentleman
First of all,
asks.
I have to tell you that we are a government institution, and I cannot go into politics. Personally, the only thing I can say, yes, but I cannot go into anything else. Sorry.
Other questions? This lady here. Here we go.
Hi, thank you again for sharing your story. You spoke of a lot of hatred and growing up with that. Were you ever able to come to peace?
Did you come to peace with your hatred, say for Germans? I know there's a great story that involves a coffee maker.
Oh, yeah. It was so
draw us out,
strong with me. It was Germans, the country, products, and of course the language. What was really tough, because in my time you could not graduate high school and go on to university if you had not taken German. My parents were really smart. At a certain point they figured there's nothing that we can do with this girl that doesn't want to open the books. And so they got me a tutor who got me interested in German Jewish poetry. So when I had to do my exam, I had one poem that I learned by heart. It was a poem with 28 stanzas. So I was lucky that they asked me what I was, because of all oral exams, what I was willing to talk about. I said, I love German poetry, so can you recite something? And I took the whole half hour to recite this poem. Lucky for me, otherwise forget it. I didn't know anything else. But I spread this hatred. Yes, I got a coffee maker, a beautiful coffee maker. When I unpacked, I took the paper off, I saw that it was made by Krups. So I never even took the coffee maker out of the box. I got a garbage bag and threw the whole coffee maker into the garbage. I didn't want it in my house. I'm not very proud of the time from being a young adult till I was in my mid-30s when I actually even spread that hatred with our children. You probably wonder, why didn't your husband say something? And he's very smart. He picks his battles. If he had said anything against my parents, we wouldn't be married 52 years. I would have left him. That's how strong I felt about my parents. So, but then something happened with our middle daughter. We were in the military. My husband was in the military, and we were stationed in Belgium, where we had on the base duplex housing. And in one side lived the president of the Jewish community. We had a very small Jewish community there. And the other side lived a German officer. And my daughter rang the bell of the Jewish family and said, you know, you have these Nazis, and she used the worst derogatory word that I had taught her, living next to you. They hate Jews, and they'll come in the middle of the night and kill you. So when I found that out, I'm not proud of this time, but when I heard that, I thought, it's not my daughter, that's me. So my husband and I talked, we got some help, and they were young enough to turn it around. Hatred begets hatred, and that's how the Holocaust started, in my opinion. So we turned it around.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, good. We have time for one more question. You have a mic? Do we have one?
Ask a question.
Yes, ma'am. Katie.
What happened to your brother after you were all liberated? What was his life story after you were all free?
My brother studied medicine in Amsterdam and became an oncologist, and never talked about the Holocaust, uses derogatory words for Germans, blames my parents for a difficult childhood. He's a lovely man. We get along very well. But he has huge hang-ups, and what helped me tremendously, and I follow kind of in the footsteps of my father, that I feel that we need to talk about it for as long as we can, because we were witnesses, and people need to know it really happened. Of course, when we can't talk anymore, there's this institution that will tell our stories, and tells it exactly the way it was.
Before I go back to Louise with one final thought, I want to thank you all for coming today. As I said before, until mid-August, we're going to have this program twice a week, every Wednesday and Thursday, so please come and see another first-person program if you're able to and in the community. But right now, it's our tradition at First Person to leave the last words to our first-person guest. And Louise, do you have any parting words of wisdom for us?
Yes. So during the Holocaust, approximately 12 million people were murdered. Out of the 12 million were 6 million Jews. Out of those 6 million Jews were 1.5 million innocent Jewish children, had not done anything wrong except they were born Jewish. People let it happen. People didn't do anything. They knew it was happening, and nobody did anything, or nobody said anything. You would have thought, after learning about the Holocaust, that people learned something. The Holocaust was genocide. Genocide never stopped after the Holocaust. We were liberated in 1945. At the end of the 1970s, we had Cambodia. 1992, we had Bosnia. 1994, Rwanda. And then we had countries in Africa, especially the Darfur region in Sudan. And look what's happening at the Middle East. Patricia gave you the museum website. Get onto the website and be informed. Watch the news, read the newspapers, make sure that you know what is real and not real. And then you can organize and do something about it, not be silent. For instance, you can write your congressmen and senators. They hate to be bombarded by mail, but they do like to be reelected. So you can make a difference, and it's important. During the Holocaust, too many nations were silent. By the time the United States thought we should come in and do something about it, most of the European Jewry was already murdered. It was too late. Don't let it be too late, please.
Thank you.